A reality in cruising is that the crew members that serve us on every cruise are often working 7 days a week for months on end for a salary that would seem a little small when it comes to comparing it to US salaries. And it always brings up the question in my mind, are these crew members being paid fairly, and are they satisfied with the pay that they get? And then another bugging question is, do they actually get the tips that we leave? Look, fortunately, I was able to recently talk to a former crew member who has a little bit of insight into these things. And he's also somebody who's went from being a crew member, an Uber driver, to now one of the largest cruise content creators in the world. Of course, I'm talking about Jay from the Shiplife. We'll talk about just those crew-centric questions. It's from a larger conversation that we had. I'll tell you how to get the full conversation at the end. But let's roll the intro and jump into this conversation about crew member satisfaction, crew member tipping, crew staffing with Jay from the Shiplife. One thing I wanted to ask about, and I didn't know if you'd have any insight on it. How are the staffing levels? I've heard several people say it feels like service is down because it doesn't seem like cruise ships are staffed. Do you think they're still struggling to get staff after the shutdown?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, I would argue that, especially because I have a lot of friends of mine that are crew members, and whether it be Philippine, Asia, right? And I keep in contact with a lot, and I mean a lot of crew members to this day. A lot of them, a lot of distrust is there. So what you're seeing now is a lot of cruise lines, a lot of crew members bouncing around between cruise lines. They're trying to see what the best option is. There was a lot of hype around, let's say, Virgin, which I would still argue at this point too. Technically, on paper, they are the best cruise line to work for as far as like what the crew members get for the most part. Free Wi-Fi, which is that's a blessing in the sky.
It's like gold, right, for crew members?
Yeah, for a lot of them, no, not really what's it called, a dress code, right? So there are a lot of benefits of them working for Virgin, but there are a lot of random rules that people aren't really privy to. Like, say for example, a lot of the bartenders migrated over to Virgin, and would you realize that Virgin everything's included, right, including the tips. So naturally, when you advertise that, it's like a structure that happened with Uber, right? When Uber came out, it's kind of like, oh, everything's taken care of, just pay and then it's done, everything's included. The bartenders aren't getting the tips anymore, because the only people that are really tipping them are maybe people that have the older school mentality of like, hey, we don't care, we're still going to give you a dollar, $2 per drink for a service. Whereas now Virgin, they do kind of cater to a more younger-ish hip crowd, or the kid in you, whatever it is they want to call it. People aren't tipping, so for them, they're like, dude, they're paying us less, we're making less money. We're going to go back to where things are done right, where we're getting tips. So there's that fact of it. And as far as the crew in general, like, this is a digital world we're living in now, right? It's a digital revolution. We're not going back. Imagine people like, let's say, and I'm not saying that we make a lot of money, because there's a lot of turnover as well, right? It's high risk, high reward, and there's going to be a lot of turnover as far as the money going in and out. But in this digital world now, there's a lot more opportunities. And a lot of people are starting to recognize that. And they're like, oh, okay, well, do I want to go here, or do I want to start a YouTube channel? Or actually, I'm pretty good at editing. Or maybe I want to have my own production, or whatever the case may be. You're seeing a lot of people worldwide that are migrating to more of the digital world, because they understand that you have a lot more flexibility. You can potentially earn a higher income. I think that's a factor that is like, that hasn't really been acknowledged yet, but I do believe that is becoming a factor. Because even when I worked on the ship, everybody had hobbies, right? There was a guy that was teaching me how to DJ. He doesn't work on ships anymore, because now he's DJing in nightclubs over in the Philippines, right? And he's doing a lot of online stuff and whatnot. A lot of people are just going into different avenues now, because they're like, hey, well, if the cruise lines aren't going to pay what I'm asking for, or if the world is kind of shifting, then I'm going to opt out. And as you could imagine, the pandemic was a big realization for a lot of people, a big reality check. And that alone for a lot of people are like, okay, well, I'm with my family for 6 months on end. I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I got to pay this much money for the visa to get over there and the contract, and it's a lot. So I think you are seeing a lot of staffing shortages. The cruise lines can try to hide that, but I think people are noticing.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of feedback that people are feeling like they're being underserved because of staff shortages. Yep. Let me ask this question. So, from looking from the outside in, watching the amount of hours that a crew member works,
Mhm.
in a week, or works 6 months without a day off, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. It's not hard to make the assumption that the crew
Mhm.
member is being underpaid. The fact that the cruise
Mhm.
line's flagged in a foreign country and it doesn't have to
Yeah.
follow U.S. labor laws. From your experience with crew members,
Mhm.
do crew members feel like the juice is worth the squeeze? Is working on a cruise ship a good opportunity, better than what they would have at home? Or what do you think motivates people to
Yeah.
work 6 months at a time without a day off?
Uh,
Is it still a good exchange in your opinion?
yeah. So that's always such a complicated conversation to have. But for me, as somebody that has worked on ships and have been around and talking, even up until this point, even every ship I go on, I make crew, and I ask them about this stuff. Like, how is it for you? The thing is, like, that's there's some things that are common misconceptions about it. Let's say, for example, the idea that it's like what they call "quote unquote" slave labor, right? A lot of the crew members they're being paid pennies on the dollar or whatever. What would typically happen is a lot of, let's say, a cruise sailing out of the United States. Yeah, they may wave what's called the flag of convenience, right? Bahamian flag. Um, from the business end, I do understand, right? They do it to dodge a lot of labor laws and taxes. However, the reality is on that end is that if they did it, cruising would be double, if not triple, the amount of what you are paying now, because they would
Yep.
have to hire American workers, pay them a reasonable salary as well, and on top of that, you wouldn't get the service because, excuse me, you can't work the hours for the crew. Let's say a crew member. People hear these things like, "Oh, this crew member's making $500 a month or something," right? It's not that low. But let's say you may have some crew members that'll make upwards or under of maybe $1,000, $1,200 a month USD. But by the time they take it back over to the Philippines, for example, right, you have to factor that into the equation. They're taking American dollars back to where they typically would use the Filipino peso, and then they would then convert that or exchange that money into their currency. And on top of that, you have to factor in the idea that the cost of living in a lot of these places are a lot significantly cheaper. Even, let's say, if I were to take my U.S. dollars, even if, let's say, well, euro and dollar is similar now, right? British pound, that's a whole nother. I hate going to the UK, but you go over to, let's say, the Europe. The cost of living over there in a lot of places, unless you're living like a major city, is significantly less. And it's the same over in the Philippines. So a lot of them don't mind. The juice is worth the squeeze because for a lot of them, the money that they make on the ship, the money they can save on the ship as well, is considerably more than they would make working someplace back at home.
Hmm. Yeah, I've never, of course, when you talk to the crew member, as a guest, I don't think anybody's going to say, I mean, I have talked to a couple that are like, man, I'm just ready to get off the ship and be done with it.
Yeah, of
But the
course, you'll get
majority,
burnt out.
the majority of people that I've talked to are like, oh yeah, this is great. But it's like, I always wonder, how transparent they could be. And I always wonder about that. I don't know if you have any insight on this, but prepaid gratuities or assigned gratuities, the service fee.
Yeah.
Are crew members getting that money, or is it just some sort of shell game to get us to pay more? Do you have
Again,
any insight?
that's such muddy waters. I'll go with one line, and the crew were telling me that they weren't. Back when I worked for Norwegian, I would hear mixed. Some people are telling me that they do. A lot of people are telling me that they don't. So for that, for me, I always say, like, I don't judge. I know there's some people that go and they take off the gratuities or whatever. I'm not saying it's right necessarily. However, I believe that you, as a paying passenger, to pay thousands of dollars for your experience, you are free to do whatever you want. If you want to say, "Hey, I want to waive that because you can't confirm to me where the money is going," which is understandable, I believe, it's understandable. I'd rather give my hard-earned money to face, right, or whatever the case may be. I'm not saying, like, for me, I don't take it off. I do both, right? I'll leave the gratuities on. I'll prepay my gratuities, and then as I go along, bartender, usually I have like rules of metrics and rules of how I go about it. I'll usually tip like $1 per drink. Usually I'm getting like a Jack and Coke, right? $1, $2, something like that per drink. That's usually what I do, especially if I have like a drink package, right? But it does vary. There are some people that have these beliefs or whatever. I can't really say indefinitely if they're getting it. But for
Hmm.
me, I've heard so many mixed things to a point to where I'm like, okay, I'll prepay my gratuities, but if somebody says they're gonna take it off, I'm not there to judge because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can confirm myself, and nobody has really confirmed. I don't care about a company statement, to be honest with you. They can say all
yeah.
day, but in my mind, I'm like, are they? And how much of it are they getting?
Yeah. I almost wish it would just be one way or the other. Like you just do the assigned gratuities and that's it, or you don't do anything and just tip as you feel like you should tip. To me,
Yeah.
that would be the most fair, because I think what happens is it makes a weird situation for the guest, right? Because yeah, say your room steward, you see that guy or gal every day for a week. I just want to give them something, right? Like I don't want it
Yeah.
just to be like, oh, hey, it's awkward, right? Oh, I did my assigned gratuity, just so you know. No, you want to give that person something. So that's always an interesting conversation in cruising to me. I do have a couple rapid fire questions for anybody that's only cruised to the Caribbean. Where should they go besides the Caribbean? There you go. This was just 10 minutes of an hour and 20-minute conversation I had with Jay. We covered a lot of topics. I would encourage you to go watch the full conversation. The video of it is posted over at the La Lita Loca Cruise podcast channel. I'll leave a link in the description for that. Or if you're into audio podcast, of course, you can get the audio version anywhere there are podcasts. And look, this is what we do here on La Lita Loca. We keep you up to date with everything going on in cruising. So if you're not subscribed here, go ahead and subscribe here. What do you think? How do you feel about these crew member issues? Does it even come into your mind when you're cruising? It's an interesting conversation. Leave a comment below. Thank you so much for checking out the show. Tony for La Lita Loca. Until the next time, we'll see you on the Lido. Bye.